Welcome dear students. Today we are going to discuss an important topic, that is hypothalamic structure and secretions. The objectives of today's lecture are to study the development of hypothalamus, to describe in detail the structure of the hypothalamus, to explain the hormones secreted by different parts of hypothalamus, to get a detailed account of the connections of the hypothalamus, and finally to understand the functions of the hypothalamus. Let us start with the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, a unique area of the brain, sends and receives hormonal and other molecular signals via the vesicular system as well as the neural signals. It is about 4 grams of the mass of the brain. Hypothalamus is considered as a major connecting link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Its main function is to maintain the homeostasis of the body. As far as the location is concerned, the hypothalamus is found in the diencephalon. It is inferior to the thalamus, posterior to the optic chiasm, and bordered on the sides by the temporal lobes and the optic tracts. The location of the hypothalamus and its interactions with the thalamus and pituitary gland enables it to act as a bridge between the nervous system and the endocrine system. The hypothalamus controls the autonomic nervous system, produces hormones, and regulates emotional and behavioral patterns. The hypothalamus also contains a feeding center, a satiety center, which regulate eating, and thirst center, which in turn regulates the drinking. In addition, hypothalamus controls the body temperature by serving as the body's thermostat. The suprachiasmatic nucleus present in the hypothalamus regulates the circadian rhythms and functions as the body's internal biological clock. Now let's discuss the development of the hypothalamus. As far as the development of the hypothalamus is concerned, the embryological development commencing at the end of the 4th week, the neural tube is organized in primary vesicles, the forebrain vesicle or proencephalon, the midbrain vesicle or mesencephalon, and the hindbrain vesicle, also called as rhombencephalon. Proencephalon further divides into 2 secondary vesicles, the telencephalon, and will form the cerebral hemispheres, and the diencephalon, which gives rise to the dicephalon. Mesencephalon forms the midbrain structure involved in the processes of vision and hearing. The hindbrain vesicle divides in metencephalon, which further forms the pons and the cerebellum, and the mesencephalon, which gives rise to the medulla of the brain. Herrick first proposed the columnar model of the forebrain organization. The columnar morphological model is based on the division of the forebrain in functional longitudinal units, placing the telencephalon in the most rostral region and the diencephalon caudally in between the telencephalon and the midbrain, while the hypothalamus, if formed from the ventral most part of the diencephalic vesicle. Mapping of the genes involved in the hypothalamic development in the last few decades have allowed the identification of a disparity between the morphological, classical, and molecular boundaries of this region. The presence of specific signaling centers plays an important role in the development of hypothalamus. Now let us discuss the structure of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is composed of nervous tissue. It is connected with the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland by hypophyseal portal blood vessels, and with the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland by axons of its neurons. The portal vessels and axons pass through a stalk to the pituitary lobes. The hypothalamus may be divided into 3 main regions: as is evident from the given table, including an anterior, middle or tuberal and posterior component. Each region can be further divided into areas that contain several nuclei which are responsible for a variety of functions. Now, the anterior region. The anterior region is also called the supraoptic region. It includes the two major nuclei, the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei. There are several other smaller nuclei in the anterior region as well. The nuclei in the anterior region are largely involved in the secretion of various hormones. Many of these hormones interact with the nearby pituitary gland to produce additional hormones. Some of the most important hormones produced in the anterior region include corticotropin releasing hormone or CRH. Corticotropin releasing hormone is involved in the body's response to both physical and emotional stress. It signals the pituitary gland to produce a hormone called adenocorticotropic hormone or ACTH. ACTH in turn triggers the production of cortisol, which is an important stress hormone. Now the thyrotropin releasing hormone or TRH. Thyrotropin releasing hormone production stimulates the pituitary gland to produce thyroid stimulating hormone or TSH. This TSH plays an important role in the proper functioning of various body parts such as the heart, gastrointestinal tract and the muscles. Now the gonadotropin releasing hormone or GnRH. Gonadotropin releasing hormone production causes the pituitary gland to produce an important reproductive hormones such as follicle stimulating hormone or FSH and the luteinizing hormone or LH. Now oxytocin controls many important behavioral and emotional processes such as sexual arousal, trust, recognition and maternal behavior. It also regulates some of the functions of the reproductive system such as childbirth and lactation. The given figure shows the actions of oxytocin hormone on various parts of the body. Now let us discuss the vasopressin. Vasopressin is also called antidiuretic hormone or ADH. This very hormone regulates the water level in the body. Whenever released, it signals the kidneys to absorb water. Now another hormone, somatostatin. Somatostatin works to stop the pituitary gland from releasing certain hormones including growth hormones and thyroid stimulating hormones. The anterior region of the hypothalamus also helps to regulate body temperature through sweat. It also maintains circadian rhythms, which are the physical and behavioral changes that occur on a daily cycle. For instance, being awake during the day and sleeping at night time is a circadian rhythm related to the presence or absence of the light in the environment. Now, the middle region. The middle region is also called as the tuberal region. It includes the two major nuclei, the ventromedial and arcuate nuclei. The ventromedial nucleus helps in controlling appetite, while the arcuate nucleus is involved in releasing growth hormones, that is GHRH, which in turn stimulates the pituitary gland to produce the growth hormone, which is responsible for the growth and development of the body. Now, let us discuss the posterior region of the hypothalamus. The posterior region is also called the mammillary region. It includes the posterior hypothalamic nucleus and the mammillary nuclei as its main nuclei. The posterior hypothalamic nucleus regulates the body temperature by causing shivering and blocking sweat production. The role of the mammillary nuclei is less clear, but the medical experts believe that they are involved in memory, learning, and the sleep functions. Now the connections of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus maintains connections with different parts of the central nervous system. In brief, the hypothalamus connects with the following structures as are represented in the given figure. Dear students, let us discuss the midbrain. The midbrain, a structure composed of neural fibers passing from the reticular formation of the midbrain through the thalamus, reaching the cerebral cortex, is the ascending reticular activating system. The system is responsible for maintaining the concentration, attention, and awakening. Through it, the reticular formation is connected with the following hypothalamic nuclei: the lateral mammary bodies, the tuberomammillary nuclei, and the periventricular nuclei. The periventricular nuclei receive information about the general visceral sensibility, while the two others are responsible for mediating the behavior and are involved in consciousness. From the reticular substance of the midbrain, the information passing from the solitary tract nucleus can also reach the hypothalamus. Now let us discuss the thalamus. The anterior hypothalamus has connections with the intralaminar nucleus and the nucleus of the median line. Multiple recent studies have confirmed that the lesions of the intraluminal group of nucleus can lead to Parkinson's disease or even schizophrenia. Dear students, let us now discuss the amygdala. The amygdala represents a conglomerate of perikaryones located in the temporal lobe. Afferent fibers from this region project directly to the hypothalamus, or neural fibers can detach from the amygdala thalamic fascicle and reach the anterior hypothalamus. It is generally involved in the body's response to fear, rewards, and memory. The ventral amygdala fugal pathway, or the stria terminalis, maintains the direct connections of the amygdala with the hypothalamus. Now the hippocampal region. The hippocampus is a curve-shaped cerebral structure located in the temporal lobe. It is formed by the dentate gyrus and different regions called comus ammonis, which are connected with the infundibular and the ventromedial nuclei of the hypothalamus. According to a research study, CA2 area, which is a small region in the hippocampus composed from pyramidal neurons, regulates memory and learning through its connections with the supramillary nuclei of the hypothalamus. Now the retina. The visual information from the retinal neuroepithelium reach the suprachiasmatic and supraoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus and are involved in the process of circadian rhythms. The hypothalamus can receive direct fibers from the retina through a retinohypothalamic tract reaching the suprachiasmatic nuclei. The connections are involved in regulating the process of the circadian rhythms. Now let us discuss the cerebral cortex. The hypothalamus and the cerebral cortex share a double sense connection. The neural fibers from the lateral hypothalamus project in the prefrontal cortex, while the frontal lobe also has efferent connections for all the hypothalamic regions. Through these connections, the autonomic control is maintained in the organism. Axons from the spinal cord can project in the hypothalamic region through the spino-hypothalamic tract. They carry out pain and temperature information. Now, the hormonal secretion of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is generally considered as a neuroendocrine structure, and its secretion is referred as a neurohormone. The hormones originating in the neurons of the hypothalamus generally pass through axons and are released from their nerve endings. These hormones, on reaching the pituitary gland through a portal circulatory system, regulate the functions of the anterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary is under the direct neural regulation control of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamic hormones regulate the secretion and synthesis of the pituitary hormones. Based on their actions, these hormones are known as releasing hormones, as they stimulate the secretion of the pituitary hormones, or inhibiting hormones, which inhibit the secretion of the pituitary hormones in turn. For example, a hypothalamic hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH, stimulates the pituitary to synthesize and release gonadotrophins, while as another hypothalamic hormone, that is somatostatin, inhibits the release of the growth hormone from the pituitary gland. So the well-known releasing and inhibitory hormones of the hypothalamus are described as follows. First, the thyrotropin releasing hormone, or TRH, also known as thyrotropin releasing factor, is a peptide hormone which stimulates release of thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, and prolactin by the anterior pituitary gland. TRH is secreted by the hypothalamus and it travels to the pituitary via the hypophyseal portal system. Now another hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH. This hormone is also a peptide hormone responsible for the release of follicle stimulating hormone, that is FSH, and luteinizing hormone, or LH, from the anterior pituitary gland. Now the another hormone, that is growth hormone releasing hormone. Growth hormone releasing hormone, also known as the growth hormone releasing factor, is a peptide hormone produced by the hypothalamus, carried by the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal circulation to the anterior pituitary gland. This GHRH is released from the neurosecretory neuroterminals, where it stimulates the synthesis and release of growth hormone, that is GH. The actions of growth hormone releasing hormone are opposed by another hypothalamic hormone, that is somatostatin, which is also known as the growth hormone inhibiting hormone, or GHIH. Somatostatin is a peptide hormone. The two active hormones of somatostatin, that is somatostatin 14 and somatostatin 28, reflecting the number of amino acid residues present in this hormone, are synthesized. These two forms of somatostatin are generated by proteolytic cleavage of prosomatostatin, which itself is derived from prosomatostatin. Somatostatin is generally performing the following actions. It inhibits the release of growth hormone, that is GH. It also inhibits the release of thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. It suppresses the release of gastrointestinal hormones. It suppresses the release of pancreatic hormones like insulin and glucagon. It suppresses the exocrine secretory actions of pancreas, and it opposes the effects of growth hormone releasing hormone, that is GHRH. Now the corticotropin releasing hormone. The corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH, initially called the corticotropin releasing factor, or CRF, is a polypeptide hormone and a neurotransmitter. Its major function is to stimulate the secretion of ACTH from the pituitary gland. Now the prolactin inhibiting hormone. The prolactin inhibiting hormone, or PIH, a dopamine, inhibits the release of prolactin, or PRL, from the anterior pituitary gland. Dopamine also functions as a neurotransmitter, activating dopamine receptors in the brain. Dear students, let's now discuss the functions of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, representing only less than 1% of the brain mass, is one of the most important control pathways of the limbic system. It is responsible for controlling most of the vegetative and endocrine functions of the body, as well as regulating the emotional behavior. The hypothalamus is also involved in regulating various daily activities like eating, like drinking, sleep, hunger, body temperature, energy maintenance, memory, stress control, and many other such functions. The main functions of the hypothalamus can be summarized as follows. Homeostasis. The major function of the hypothalamus is to keep the body in homeostasis as much as possible. Homeostasis is the process by which steady state equilibrium in the body is maintained with respect to physiological functions and chemical composition of fluids and tissues. Physiological set points refer to the baseline levels at which the physical functions like the heart rate and chemical compositions like plasma, sodium concentrations are normally maintained. These set points are represented in the brain by certain specific discharge rates in the neurons responsible for monitoring and control of specific physiological processes. Therefore, these separate groups of neurons are dedicated to the control of heart rate, temperature, etc. by their set point discharge rate. The hypothalamus contains the greatest concentration of nuclei at which set points are encoded, monitored, and controlled, and thus can be considered as the key brain areas for the control of homeostasis. Now, the circadian rhythms. The hypothalamus, despite its small size, is an important integrative region of the brain with complex functions and multiple connections with essential cerebral structures. The circadian rhythm represents the endogenous clock of an organism responsible for its involvement in the well-being of the body by keeping the body's major functions within normal limits. The photosensible suprachiasmatic nucleus, along with its connections with the pituitary gland, is involved in the process of circadian rhythm. The suprachiasmatic nucleus receives electrochemical information from the stimulated retina. Now let us discuss about the Center for Autonomic Nervous System. The hypothalamus is responsible for regulating both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. The anterior region of the thalamus exerts an excitatory effect over the sympathetic system, while the posterior and the lateral ones exert an excitatory effect over the parasympathetic system. Now, the cardiovascular regulation. The stimulation of the different areas of the hypothalamus can result in different types of neurogenic effects on the cardiovascular system, such as increased heart rate, increased arterial pressure, decreased arterial pressure, and decreased heart rate. Generally, the stimulation in the posterior and the lateral parts of the hypothalamus increases the arterial pressure and heart rate, where stimulation in the preoptic area often has opposite effects, resulting in a decrease in both heart rate and arterial pressure. The specific cardiovascular control centers in the reticular region of the pons and medulla are mainly responsible for the transmission of such effects. Now let us discuss the regulation of body water by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is responsible for regulating the body water in two different ways. One, it creates a sensation of thirst in order to make the animals or person or individuals drink water. And the second, it controls the excretion of water into the urine. The thirst center areas is located in the lateral part of the hypothalamus. When the fluid electrolytes in either this center or closely allied areas becomes too concentrated, the animal feels thirst and develops an intense desire to drink water. It will search out the nearest source of water and drink enough to return the electrolyte concentration of the thirst center to the normal. Dear students, let us now discuss the regulation of uterine contractions and milk ejection from the breasts. The stimulation of the paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus can cause their neuronal cells to secrete the hormone oxytocin. This in turn causes increased contractility of the uterus as well as the contraction of the myoepithelial cells surrounding the alveoli of the breasts, which ultimately cause the alveoli to empty their milk through the nipples. At the end of pregnancy, especially, large quantities of oxytocin are secreted, which helps to promote labor contractions to expel the baby. A reflex signal from the nipple to the posterior hypothalamus also causes oxytocin release. Whenever the baby suckles the mother's breast, and the oxytocin then performs the necessary function of contracting ductules of the breasts, thereby expelling milk through the nipples so that the baby can nourish itself. Now let us discuss the control of the hormonal secretions by the anterior pituitary gland. The stimulation of certain other areas of the hypothalamus is also responsible for making the anterior pituitary gland to secrete its endocrine hormones. The basic mechanism involved can be summarized as follows. The anterior pituitary gland receives its blood supply mainly from the blood that first of all flows through the lower part of the hypothalamus and then through the anterior pituitary vascular synovius. Before reaching the anterior pituitary, specific releasing and inhibitory hormones are secreted into the blood by various nuclei of the hypothalamus as the blood courses through the hypothalamus. These hormones are then transported via the blood to the anterior pituitary gland, where they act on the glandular cells to control the release of the specific anterior pituitary hormones. Now the regulation of body temperature. The anterior portion of the hypothalamus, especially the preoptic area, is mainly responsible for the regulation of the body temperature. The activity of temperature sensitive neurons increases with an increase in the temperature of the blood flowing through this very area of the hypothalamus, while a decrease in the temperature decreases their activity respectively. These neurons in turn control mechanisms for increasing or decreasing the body temperature. Finally, the reproduction. The reproductive functions of an organism is mainly assured by the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. The hypothalamus is responsible for secreting the gonadotropin releasing hormone, which in turn stimulates the production of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone in the anterior subdivision of the pituitary gland. The action of these two hormones on the gonads determines the estrogen and testosterone production, which impacts the male and female behaviors respectively. The neurons in the preoptic are involved in the male sexual behavior, while the neurons in the tubular region impact the female sexual behavior. Dear students, it was all about today's lecture. Hope you have understood it well. Thank you and goodbye.